We're gearing up for fantasy football drafts, and we've already done 6 real fantasy leagues between the two of us. There are 5 mistakes that we've noticed early in these drafts that if you keep these in mind and avoid them in your own drafts, it's going to set you up for a lot more fantasy football success this year than if you were to ignore these. So here we go. Mistake number 1 that I've seen people make is fading running back. Fading running back this year is just a completely horrible idea. And we're going to talk about this when we release our strategy video and outline what our favorite strategy is for this year. It's going to be a little bit different, I think, than everybody else's strategy this year. But you can kind of get an idea of what we're going to tell you to do round by round just by knowing we don't like fading running back this year. A pretty good example of this, I guess, is we can go ahead and pull up the draft from last night. That we did. And in this draft, Nathan and I had 2 pretty different team builds. I was at the 101. I drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. I did take Jeremiah Love at the 2-3 turn because, again, I wanted to take 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds, and Love is still a good value there. Don't listen to Nathaniel Hackett. Don't listen to the training camp doom or anything like that. Jeremiah Love at the 2-3 turn is an okay price. You can chirp the pick all you want, but I like Jeremiah Love there this year. And so I had my 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds. I took Pickens, and then in the 4th round, I took Montgomery. So I came out of the first 5 rounds with 3 running backs.
And I did the total inverse in the first 4 rounds.
Exactly.
Basically just to see what happens. So like you going a wide receiver running back in the first 2 rounds is totally fine. But if you do that, basically what I learned is that you want to make sure that you take your running back in the 3rd round instead of just depending on them coming back in the wrap in the early 4th or mid 4th, because I was more in the middle range there. I was towards the latter third of the end of the first round. But again, when you look at the guys that are drafting here at the 110 to the 112, a couple of them had doubled up on running back in the first 2 rounds, and one of those guys ended up taking a 3rd running back like Avery did through the first 4 rounds. And then I was looking at a massive teardrop, so I would have had to either reach on Judkins at the 404 like significantly when Judkins and Henderson really should both be going in the 5th, or I ended up just taking a wide receiver like Higgins, which again, like if your strength is wide receiver on a team like this, that's totally fine. But what you realize the further down you go the board, or the further down the board you go, you're like essentially entirely screwed at running back. So, like in previous years where you've had a guy like Scatterbu going in the 9th round who was a decent upside shot, now guys like those are going more in the 5th and 6th round, like Bashal Tutin, for example, who's kind of been thrust into a lead role this season, and he's going like in the 5th round, as opposed to, again, a lot of these upside shots just not being near as good at the running back position from round 7 through 9. I think the best one, I ended up being like, I guess, lucky enough to get one of Dobbins or Harvey there at the 709, but I wouldn't use lucky. I'm not a big fan of that running back room at all. As your running back 2, that's horrible, right? So again, an experiment gone wrong / to show you guys that like this is what happens to teams that don't lock down 2 running backs in the first 4 rounds of your fantasy draft.
Yeah, and again, when we lay out our strategy in the strategy video, we're going to talk about different ranges of the draft because there are certain thresholds. Like if you're drafting here in the range where Nathan drafted, you're going to have to reach on a running back at some point. You almost certainly have to reach on a running back at some point, and we're going to tell you that in the video. Like, hey, even though ADP has these guys going a little bit before, even if you don't want to, even if there is a wide receiver value, you have to take running back here because you're screwed if you don't let running back come back to you, and then you end up without it. So fading running back, again, people are going to say, no running back has started to phase out now that the best ball bros have got less of a grip on the content in the fantasy football space. And some of us regular dudes are like, hey, running backs are good again. So It's not as popular as it used to be, but don't fade running back in any of your drafts, whether you're drafting on ESPN, Yahoo, Sleeper, wherever, CBS, NFL. Do not fade running backs in your league. The algorithm will help you not fade running backs. It will constantly tell you to move running backs up the board. We have them ranked accordingly in the algorithm. And again, can help you with your draft, pick your draft strategy, help you with every single pick, build the right roster for your league settings and specific platform as well. We have every platform supported, and it's a live tool that you can interact with that will, again, walk you through your draft and help you build the best fantasy football team to help win your league. And so you can check it out. It's available with the Season Pass. The Season Pass comes with everything on the site, the rankings, the trade calculator, personalized start-sit questions for Nathan and I on our live streams as well. So you can get it for $34 down in the link below, $34 for the entire year. And you get everything, including the algorithm you can use during your drafts and a couple other really good draft tools on the site as well. So go check that out at the link in the pinned comment. Mistake number 2 here. Yeah,
it's going to be taking a quarterback and tight end in the top 6 rounds. I think it's totally respectable to take one of those guys in the top 6 rounds if you get a good enough value faller. If Josh Allen, is available in the 4th round in your draft and you want to take a shot there, that's fine. If Jaden Daniels or Drake May is available in the late 6th round, you can take one of those guys. It's totally fine. I would strongly advise against taking a Trey McBride or a Brock Bowers or a Colson Loveland when you're drafting or have drafted a Josh Allen or a Lamar or a Daniels or a May in the top 6 rounds as well. And the reason that's the case is because what does that do to your skill positions? What does that do to wide receiver or running back? Essentially what happens is when you invest in both onesie positions in the top 6 rounds, you're totally depleting either running back or wide receiver. Let's say you lock down running back in the first 2 or 3 rounds, and then you take a tight end and a quarterback. That means you have 2 of the 6 rounds in the top 6 rounds where you have the ability to hopefully get a good enough shot taken at wide receiver. And then you're kind of in trouble after that. If you're in a start 3 wide receiver format, if you're in a start 2 wide receiver plus 2 flex, you best believe that you're going to have to either flex running backs that you're drafting then in like the 7th and 8th round, or you're going to be flexing those wide receivers that you draft in the 7th or 8th round, like Jaden Reed, like Matthew Golden, like Casey Concepcion, like Josh Downs. Like it gets really, really ugly there. Whereas let's try to lock down your flex positions with running back and wide receiver before we really stress out about having to lock down both quarterback and tight end. I drafted in my first draft of the year, I ended up getting Brock Bowers at the 302. I was really, really happy with that price point. I rarely ever heavily advocate for people taking an elite tight end in the top 2 rounds. But again, if Bowers is going to be available for me at the 302, I will more than happily take him there because he's such a significant value faller. But what did I do after that? I didn't touch quarterback in the top 6 rounds. I didn't even entertain quarterback until like the 8-9 turn. And what I ended up doing is since I took Bowers there in the 3rd round, I made sure I got my second running back out of the top 5 rounds, actually, technically 4 rounds because I had the 4-5 turn. I got Swift to pair with Gibbs, and then to pair with Olave, I got J-Mo, Lemon, and Addison to get my core 4 wide receivers, flex spots taken care of. Then I can look at a quarterback at the absolute earliest in the 8th round. But again, you don't want to be looking at quarterback any earlier than that. You don't want to be looking at tight end any earlier than that if you take an Allen in the 3rd or a Lamar in the 5th. So I actually did the complete opposite of that in this draft that I think I totally botched. And just to see what happened, again, you can see it here. Tyler Warren and Drake May I took in the 5th and 6th round, all right? I took a tight end and I took a elite upside quarterback in the top 6 rounds. And then look what happened to wide receiver and running back. Even though I locked down 3 wide receivers in the first 4 rounds, which is already overkill and really hurt my running back chances in the later rounds, it actually doesn't even look pretty at wide receiver beyond my top 3 guys. I'm not even super locked down at that position. And let's not even talk about running back. Like I'm living on a prayer at the running back position, literally depending on RJ Harvey and Ramondre Stevenson doing anything consistently all year long, which is more than likely not going to happen. So that's the cost of drafting Warren and May. Some people liked those selections, and in a vacuum, Warren in the late 5th is a fine pick. In a vacuum, Drake May in the early 6th is a fine pick. But if you're doing them both on the same team, this is what happens to the overall roster construction of your team, and it really, really is going to hurt you.
The next mistake that we're going to talk about here that we do need to avoid this year, as we talked about in our offensive ranking videos, which everybody loved, where we had the Colts ranked, even though it was literally just Jonathan Taylor that had them ranked that high, it is taking too many players on bad offenses. You're automatically lowering your entire ceiling on a week-to-week basis by drafting players that are not playing in good offenses, that reach the red zone frequently, and that are scoring a lot of points in real NFL so that your fantasy football players can score points, right? So, for example, if you're drafting a Devon Achane, for example, in the first round, well, you're probably going to want to pair him with some guys in some pretty darn good offenses in the 2nd and 3rd round, right? You might want to go Chase Brown. You might want to try to get somebody in the 3rd or 4th round, like a Zay Flowers, projected really good offense this year. Ladd McConkey, projected a very good offense this year. You're going to want to stack players with good offenses, and it's fine taking shots on guys like Devon Achane, who's in a less than desirable offense, Brock Bowers, who's in a less than desirable offense, Breece Hall. Don't love Breece Hall because I don't love the offense there, but it is what it is. Malik Neighbors, technically not in a desirable offense. You can draft those guys. It's just a matter of making sure that the large majority of the guys you draft are on good offenses. And of course, half the NFL offenses are good and half of them are bad, right? And somewhat of a rough distribution there. And so, who's going to take the bad players? Well, if you're playing in a league of sharps, it's going to be tough. And you're just going to have to balance out what the value is of a player compared to whether they play on a good or bad offenses. You're not going to have all players on good offenses. But you're playing in home leagues, casual leagues, things like that. You might be able to do that. You might be able to have your pick of guys all in the same tier and say, I'm just going to start sniping guys in the best offenses. They're going to have the best red zone opportunities every week. We also talked about best offenses for fantasy football being not only projected output, like, Vegas lines, for example, but also concentration. And so this makes guys like Chase Brown really valuable, right? This makes guys like Ladd McConkey very valuable if that concentration can go up. Javonte Williams, very valuable, very concentrated offense there with a lot of output. Kyron Williams, very valuable. And so, again, when in doubt, the tiebreaker for me when I'm picking between guys of the same position in a tier is just to pick guys in the best offenses. And so I think that's a mistake that people make, though, is that they go through an entire draft and like, oh, this was a really good pick, this was a really good pick, this was a really good pick. And you look back and you realize you drafted players off of the Dolphins, the Jets, the Cardinals, and then you're like, oh, crap, this is not going to turn out very well for me. No, it's not. It's not. And again, what it does is lower your floor and your ceiling. So you're not going to be able to score as much on a week-to-week basis because your players are so matchup dependent. They're so matchup dependent to where if they're playing a top 20 defense, they're going to be very, and they're going to be in pretty severe danger of not scoring a lot that week. And it makes their floor inherently a lot lower. And so when you're talking about scoring points, which is what wins fantasy football leagues, there's a direct correlation between players that play on good offenses and them scoring fantasy points. And so simply making sure that the large majority of the players on your roster are playing in like top 15 offenses is, again, another really easy and simple way to, number one, break ties when you're picking between players in drafts, and number two, ensure that your ceiling is high enough to win on a week-to-week basis, including in the playoffs, and make sure your floor is not low enough to where you're bottoming out week after week after week. It'll also make sure for your mental health when you are playing fantasy football that you don't have to sit there and watch terrible offenses. Trust me, I know everything about this because when the freaking Bengals were starting whoever the frick, before they traded for Flacco, they're starting Browning, right?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I wanted to die. Oh my gosh, I wanted to die.
I had to watch the Jets and the Cardinals.
Nate did this last year. Nate drafted Garrett Wilson and drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. And drafted Jefferson in the first round, right? And so you technically had
being
a horrible offense to watch, right?
It was bad here.
Like Nate was stuck watching the most horrible teams of all time last year. And again, so mental health wise, you got to keep your head in the game, man. And part of that is just being able to make sure you're watching some fun offenses on a week-to-week basis. It makes it a lot more fun for fantasy football. So make sure you're not drafting too many players on bad offenses.
I think drafting too many unproven players is a mistake that a lot of people are prone to making every year. And I've done it on some teams. I try to avoid it as much as possible. But usually it can be really tempting when you see a young player that you're really high on, because you're usually high on multiple young players who are unproven in the top 7 rounds, to take multiple shots on them. And I did this last year in the Flock League where I was like, okay, I'm projecting that Garrett Wilson is going to produce at a high level. I'm projecting, which he actually did before he went down the injury. I'm projecting that Marvin Harrison is going to produce at a high level. I'm projecting that Quinshawn is going to produce at a high level. I'm projecting that Caleb Johnson is going to get significant work in his offense because they drafted him day 2, and then he's like a healthy scratch every single week. And Caleb Johnson, Judkins, and Marv, I drafted back to back to back, and I only hit on one of them. Even if you hit on one of them, like, again, the odds that you're going to hit on multiple of them is so low that you really don't want to be putting so many of your eggs in an unproven basket, right? And with those types of players this year, like Henderson and Carnell Tate and Rome Odunze, Luther Burden, Mekhi Lemon, individual players that we like, and some of their upside outlooks are really, really promising given whatever offense they might be playing in. But the reality is, if you're taking shots on all of those guys in your draft, you're taking big time risks here. And look at what Avery did in his draft that we just did a couple days ago. Jeremiah Love, he took at the 212. That's a heavy investment for technically an unproven player in a really bad offense. Mm-hmm. Following it up with George Pickens and David Montgomery is what you really should do to make up for a guy who's probably going to start slow like Jeremiah Love. Luther Burden is another, unproven pick. So Love and Burden is definitely the risk point of this roster, but supplementing it with a guy that you feel comfortable with in Wan'Dale Robinson in the 7th round is really nice. Supplementing it with a guy like Sam Laporta and a good offense is really nice. I just generally recommend that people take shots on unproven players after the 7th round, because the reality is the players that you're drafting from the 8th, 9th round and beyond, a lot of those guys end up being potential cut candidates at some point in the middle of the season because they disappoint. They don't do anything from production perspective. Some of them get injured or they get, taken over by some guy that ended up breaking out who was going in the later rounds, right? Cam Scottaboo was a great example of this last year. Looking back, I would have much rather just been like, okay, screw it. I drafted in the first 4 rounds to a level where I'm not going to have the ability to really lock down running back in this first 6 rounds. And I'm just going to have to take a shot in the later rounds and hope that it works out. Instead of taking Caleb Johnson in the 6th round, I should have just taken Cam Scatterby in the 8th or 9th round instead, because the value and the payoff at that price point was just so much higher, and the flexibility I would have had in the middle of the season would have been so much better. And again, I feel like I did a pretty decent job of that in my first draft here, where I took Gibbs and Olave and Bowers, all proven guys, JMO, proven guy, DeAndre Swift, proven guy. And again, I didn't even look at an unproven guy with many questions until the 6th round of Mekhi Lemon in a best ball format. And then Jordan Addison, who has question marks, yeah, but he's, more proven when JJ McCarthy isn't throwing on the ball. And then most of my upside shots were like Casey Concepcion in the 9th round. Isaiah Pacheco has a lot of questions in the 13th round as an insurance option to handcuff with Jahmyr Gibbs. So again, I think there's a balance there. I'm going to encourage a lot of people to take shots on unproven players that have high value upside, but not too many. If you take too many, your floor is going to be toilet bowl level and maybe losing the league and maybe suffering a punishment.
Okay, the last mistake here, it's a pretty simple one, but I think it can actually be fairly important, is in the middle rounds of your drafts, waiting to grab your guy because of why? Value, ADP, who freaking cares? Fact of the matter is, from rounds like 4 through 6 in fantasy football drafts, the hit rates there are abysmal. Go back and look at the 4th through 6th round in 2025. All of them sucked. And yes, I know what you're going to say. First of all, a perfect example of this is Nathan drafting Quinshon Judkins.
Did y'all forget that you still need running backs to win championships? Y'all just let Judkins fall into my hands.
Whoa! My gosh.
And everybody, literally, Nathan was, I'm not exaggerating, the laughing stock of the entire fantasy football content community for 4 weeks, until Quinshon Judkins stepped on the field and everybody was like, wait, what? Yeah, he was. And I was making fun of him too, because I was like, yeah, you could have just gotten him around 6.
Which I could have.
Which you could have. That was not why.
That was the mistake.
People weren't making fun of you for that reason, though. People were just saying it was a terrible pick in general because of Quinshon Judkins, whatever, because he's going to go back to college. I never thought that. Regardless, though, the point is there was a lesson to be learned there. Everybody trashed Nathan because he reached on a player that he wanted to draft in the 5th round. But you go back and look at the 5th round, Quinshon Judkins was actually the best pick in the 5th round. Why? Because every player in those rounds, all of them are at very high risk of not hitting in fantasy football. And so waiting to grab a player because he's not up yet, or I think it's too early, blah, blah, blah. In middle rounds, grab your guys, in my opinion, because it is going to pay off for you more often than not. Now, it can also backfire on you because you could take Caleb Johnson in the 6th round,
right,
and, then it kind of equals out taking Quinshon Judkins a good pick in the 5th round.
That's why you have to balance the unproven players, right?
Well, you also drafted Marv too, so it's just like
exactly.
There's some things to be learned there. And while I don't single-handedly want to coach Nathan into beating me in the Flock League this year, it might be what's happening on this video.
I literally already mentioned it in the unproven players.
No, I know, but if Nathan wins, I'm going to take full credit for it, and I'm going to take half of the 100K.
Right,
so, again, in the middle rounds though, I just don't be afraid to grab your guy there because the hit rates are so bad. Obviously, be careful. Don't want to reach 4 rounds on a guy. I'm not opposed to reaching in fantasy football drafts when it's at a point where in the draft where you really don't know what you're getting, and nobody knows what they're getting, to be honest with you. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that, ADP in fantasy football, worry less about this guy, I'm taking 6 picks above ADP. Worry about your tiers. The tiers are what matter a lot more. And the truth of the matter is, when you get to this range that Avery's talking about, especially like the 4th, 5th, and 6th round, those tiers expand and they widen so much to a point where some of them literally span an entire round. So if you're reaching like upwards of 12 picks in ADP on a player, but you're still in the same tier, you're not really reaching there. So that's why it matters so much in the middle rounds. Don't worry as much about ADP.
So there you go. 5 mistakes. You can avoid these mistakes. Have more success in your fantasy football leagues. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed. Check out the season pass. $34 below. Get you the algorithm. Get you everything on the Flock site as well. More vids coming soon. We'll be live as well. What day are we releasing this? Thursday? Friday? Thursday?
Yeah.
Friday? We're live tonight?
Both
Yeah,
nights.
I'm doing an auction draft tonight. See you tonight. Bye.